Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Charlotte Majorana, and I'm the VP of Books at Emerald Publishing and a proud partner with the AMA on our book series, The 7 Problems of Marketing. So why now for a series like this? Well, our fundamental aim with this series is to hone the practice of marketing for the 21st century. It's the age of data, social, mobile, automation, and globalization, pandemic and rearing from a pandemic. The field is changing so quickly and it's difficult to keep up. There's increasing uncertainty about the profession's mission and responsibilities, and in the meantime, the demands marketers face are ever more complex and critical. So we joined up with some of the world's most innovative professionals, academics, and thought leaders to create this series. What are the problems? The first, which we'll be talking about today, is effectively targeting high-value sources of growth. Then the second, defining the role of marketing in the firm and C-suite, managing the digital transformation of the modern corporation, generating and using insight to shape marketing practice, dealing with an omni-channel world, competing in dynamic global markets, and lastly, balancing incremental and radical innovation. Now, all of the conceptual and analytical frameworks that are offered for these problems are born from practice. The authors have applied their tools and methods in client settings, allowing to test them and refine their ideas in the face of real-world challenges. The Organic Growth Playbook, which focuses on the first problem, effectively targeting high-value sources of growth, its co-authors Bernie Jaworski and Bob Lurie have done just this, and Bob is here to talk all about it, as Bernie couldn't today due to a family situation. Bob Lurie is Vice President, Corporate Strategy for Eastman, and before that, he was a senior partner, then co-managing partner of Monitor Group. He founded Monitor's marketing growth practice and was the architect of the innovative approach to growth marketing that fueled its success and laid the groundwork for this very playbook. Over his career, he's worked with scores of CEOs and GMs in nearly every sector and part of the world to create successful growth strategies and help them adopt the approach organization-wide. Now, that point is really key, as this book talks to the same problem wherever you are. It might be a different flavor of B2B or B2C, but this framework is used in almost every sector and almost across every continent. So Bob, we are thrilled to have you here to discuss this, and thanks again so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me very much.
So we're gonna jump right in. So your work, as we said, looks at problem 1, effectively targeting high-value sources of growth. Bob, can you tell us something about how this problem has manifested itself among your clients?
Okay, so I'm gonna, yes, I'd love to. The origin story for all of this work is fairly early on in my career at Monitor, working with a variety of companies. I started to notice that what I was doing, which was following the classic marketing playbook, and I'm going to talk about that a bit more in a moment, it just didn't work reliably. Just didn't work reliably. You know, we do the segmentation, we do the targeting, we do the positioning, we come up with great creative, and sometimes it would work, and sometimes it didn't. So the problem that the book and all of this is intended to address is actually, it's a kind of funny one. It's one that the profession doesn't actually like to talk about very much. But it's the problem is generating or accelerating the growth rate of whatever product or service you've got, new or existing, reliably. Because what I've found over the years is most companies actually have a good sense of where they can look for growth. You know, it's the market, it's an adjacent market, it's some segment of a market, it's a product, whatever. The problem arises, the real problem arises when they actually follow the rule book or the conventional wisdom that they were taught in business school. What we were, you know, roughly speaking, taught in business school was, first, you go segment your market, and if you're going to do it right, you segment it around your product. You segment needs and attitudes, and you come up with a needs-based segmentation. And then you pick your target. You pick a good segment, which really means the segment that you think will respond best to your product's distinguishing attributes. and then you position yourself, which I somewhat rudely characterize as figuring out how to shout as loudly and as frequently as you can afford about how great your product is. And that always annoys people, but that's what it kind of boils down to. When you do those three things, growth is just supposed to happen. You know, you've kind of figured out the people who should like your product, and you've talked to them and you've told them as best you can. And the big problem is the growth doesn't happen. Okay, it fails, or the growth campaigns fail, or they fail to meet expectations most of the time. I mean, we all know the statistics on new products. What is 95% of new product launches don't go anywhere. But it's also true on what I observed back when I started, and ever since, you know, even with old products, the kind that are good but not exceptional, is over a 50% failure rate of the campaigns. They just don't move the needle very much. And what happens in most organizations, which I always found fascinating, is people basically chalk it up to one of two things. They chalk it up to, oh, we had bad timing relative to competitors. Competitor launched a new product, or they did something mean and nasty in the marketplace. Or most often, it's chalked up to poor execution. You know, we have a great product, you know, but the big idea from the agency wasn't very good, or the communications weren't good, or we got the marketing mix wrong, or something like that. And the big insight for myself and for Bernie over the years was it's actually neither of those things. Sometimes there is poor execution. Sometimes the competitors do mean and nasty things. But fundamentally, we're focusing on the wrong thing, or to be more precise about it, we're over focusing on something that, and I'm going to be a little bit engineering and mathematical here, is something that's necessary but not sufficient. And so people always, when I say that, they go, what the hell are you talking about? What I'm trying to say is the basic premise of the conventional approach to stimulating growth, to accelerating growth, is this. If customers can be convinced to want the functionality or the attributes of your product or your service, they're going to hunt it down, and they're going to buy it. Okay? They're going to get their shopping list, and they're going to go right out, and they're going to find it. And if they don't find it in the first store, they're going to go to the second store. If they don't find it in the second store, they're going to go to the third store. Only problem is it's not true. That's not how people buy. That's not how they behave. And I'm going to give you a little example. One of the ones where we first stumbled across this. I was working in this is the cosmetics industry, and please forgive me out there, you know, yes, I'm a guy talking about cosmetics, but you know, we did spend a lot of time with a very, very prominent consumer packaged goods company, kind of helping them try to accelerate the growth of their existing brands. And you know, in that company and at that time, and I think what's probably characteristic of that industry, there's an absolute belief that, you know, if you could put an aspirational figure, CoverGirl or whatever, in front of people, people would go and buy that cosmetic. So I want to be like so-and-so. And that, you know, the advertising was critical. What we actually found when we went and studied the process by which people buy cosmetics. Now, this is an old story, so the punchline is actually now normal reality. But at the time, this was a big surprise. But what we actually found is women typically make up their mind about what brand to buy at the wall, or if they had to buy it in a drugstore or whatever it is when they got home, when they tried it on. Because the thing they were actually looking for was, does this color look good on me? Wasn't whether it came from L'Oreal or came from Maybelline or came from CoverGirl or came from, you know, Brown or whoever the brand was. And it wasn't about the model. It was, at the end of the day, does this look good on me? Now, Sephora's built a whole model, built a whole world on this. But the point I'm trying to make is this consumer packaged goods company, very major one, they're all following the playbook. Just figure out what I got to say about it lasts longer, it looks great, and it's aspirational. And the whole theory is convince them that your brand's great and they will go buy it. And here, and by the way, many of the people we were interviewing and tracking and so forth set out with a shopping list to go buy a certain brand. And then when they got a chance to actually try it on, they said, no, that color doesn't look good. And Charlotte, you're kind of nodding your head. It's like, oh yeah, that's duh obvious. Yep, it's duh obvious. And the way I summarize this is that something happened on the way to the store, okay, which actually completely changed their what they actually buy. And that took us down a path towards what's in the book, which is a set of principles and some tools to kind of implement those principles that we have found over the years go a very, very long way. And I'm now coming back to where I started, towards reliable growth. Okay, the reason why that campaigns were failing was because they were just talking about product. There's something else you needed to be talking about, which is how they go about buying, and you need to be shaping what we have come to call high yield buying behaviors. So I'm going to wrap this piece up, Charlotte, for a moment, but there are 4 critical ideas in the book that kind of set it apart, and I've named one of them, and it's probably the most important one, but I want to get all of them out. One of them is that how you buy, that is, who you're with, where you are, what activity you're doing, is the primary determinant of what you buy. Okay, not what the functional needs are. Now, there's a very, very special thing in here that people often kind of say, well, wait a minute, product needs matter. Of course they matter. Yes, they do. Most of us exist in what I'll call very familiar, mature categories. We're selling orange juice, we're selling nuts and bolts, we're selling refrigerators, all kinds of stuff people know about. In that kind of a world, the product differences aren't big enough to drive people to go out the door, hunt you down, and buy it. And in that world, actually, what happens in the buying process, in the buying journey, actually more often than not determines what brand or what product you actually buy. Second idea that I would just want to mention very quickly is mapping the market and picking your targets differently than your competitors. If you're kind of say, what are the problems people have growing? Well, you're all doing the same thing. You all share the same segmentation map. You're all targeting the exact same people. The analogy I use to kind of describe this is not particularly PC these days, but it harkens back to World War I. And in World War I, most of you will recall from ancient history, that basically had 600 miles of trenches between the North Sea and Switzerland, and literally they spent 4 years contesting hundreds of yards, sometimes thousands of yards. Why? Well, because the way you did things then is you said, hey, that looks like a vulnerable part of my opponent's line. I'm going to line up 1,000 cannon, and I'm going to pound away for 2 weeks with those cannon, and then I'm going to send my troops over the top. And millions of people died, and they gained maybe 100 yards or 1,000 yards or 2,000 yards. We do pretty much the same thing. We all have the same maps. Oh, in the finance world, I want mass affluent or high. Say, oh, fine. Gee, do you think every other bank in the country is targeting the exact same people with the exact same definition? So map the market, target, pick your targets differently. Third thing is focusing on reducing barriers to the behavior change you want. instead of trying to motivate people. It's a very interesting sociological thing, I think. Marketers get trained to, or maybe we kind of self-select, but we're boosters. We like to talk about how great what we're doing are. You should do this because it's a really great thing. When in most of our markets, people think they know your product and they kind of think they know why you're doing, they think they know what it's good at and bad at, and they've already decided why they don't want to buy it. That's why they aren't buying it right now. So if you said to me, gee, Bob, you've got 6 months to kind of generate some bump in growth, the very first thing I do is go try to figure out non-price. What are the non-price reasons why people don't change the behavior in the buying process in a favorable way, don't like my product? And I'd work on that much more than, let me tell you another way why my product is great. So I know I've been going on for a bit there, Charlotte, but I kind of want to kind of lay it out. You said, what's the problem? And the fundamental problem is, so many teams, so many companies, so many places that I've worked over the years, you've got people who really know their stuff, really good teams, they're doing a great job, they do the research and all this kind of good stuff. And they put together a campaign, they run the campaign, it's actually well designed. It doesn't work more than half the time, and they don't know why. And all this is, this may not be all the reasons why those things fail, but I've found over the years that if you pay attention to these things, you get more reliable growth.
Thank you so much. And you weren't going off on a rant. I think that, what you've done is give a great foundation to the playbook itself. And you've already done a great summary of how this is so practical and what it's aiming to do. And a little bit earlier, I had mentioned that, Bernie isn't with us today. So I was wondering if you can talk a little bit to what's come out of your collaboration with Bernie on this.
Yeah, so what came out of the collaboration is, we've been basically exploring these ideas. I mean, I'm the son of an engineer, and, I learned a bunch from my dad about, how do you analyze problems? And when I first ran across this, I started tackling it by saying, so where's the yield loss? I got all these good people doing stuff in this complicated process of coming up with a growth campaign and executing it. Where is it failing? And, I stumbled into a number of those ideas just by kind of looking and trying different things and so on and so forth. And what Bernie, with Bernie's help, started to connect it back to the literature and the conventional wisdom, number one. And secondly, to start to turn it into a set of very, very usable, practical tools. So the book is in fact organized around these 5 principles, and they're basically a step-by-step process. That's why we call it a playbook. If you really do think hard about the buying process, that's the first principle, and figure out where the high leverage or high yield buying behaviors are. Second, you actually segment your market based around finding people of a high propensity to that segmentation, so on and so forth. You're going to grow more reliably. So that collaboration with Bernie led to, and folks, when they take a look at the book, that it's not what I would call, one of my friends said to me, it's not an airplane read. It's not who moved your cheese. It's much more of a how-to. We've got a lot of it's very rooted in the science and in the theory, and we talk about that. But fundamentally, my hope was, we helped lots and lots of teams and lots of sectors and lots of businesses actually, whatever their growth rate was to begin with, move it to 1.5 to 2 times that. That's just what happened. There's no theoretical reason why it was 1.2 to 1.5 to 2 times, but it turned out to be. And we wanted to get it down so people could actually use it themselves.
Thank you. No, that's fantastic. So one of the things you were kind of talking about a little earlier was you're saying that growth is only reliably coming from behavior change. So does that mean that product service differentiation is irrelevant?
Actually, it's a great question, and the answer is no. It goes back to what I tried to sneak into my opening remarks, this idea of product differentiation, service differentiation of some degree is absolutely necessary. You know, you don't have anything to sell, if you don't have something that's got some selling points. The point is it's not sufficient, okay? So this is something that people do struggle with, is like, well, it's a hell of a lot of work to come up with, how my product is different and to make it different. And now you're telling me I have to do something else. Yes, that's precisely right. So let me talk a little bit about we're not saying it's irrelevant. What we're saying is it's not enough. And I'd love to talk a little bit about the contention I've made, which is growth comes from behavior change, okay? And the whole point about something happened on the way to the store. The basic idea here is that I don't care what category you're in, orange juice, nuclear reactors, everything in between, you go through a buying process. There's a set of activities that people go through. My cosmetics example, there's a set of things people do to decide, which brand of lipstick or which brand of mascara or whatever they're going to buy. And the point we're trying to make there is that if you can actually change some of the activities that they do during the buying process, you change the odds of their buying your product. Okay, simplest way I can say, or not simple, just to give an example, if you tell me, and we did this work in the furniture industry, you tell me that you've decided you want to redecorate a room or redecorate a portion of your house, and the first thing you do is, when you've that's popped into your head, you've got an intent to buy, first thing you do is call your mother or call your sister or call your brother and say, hey, where did I love the stuff that you have in your house. Where did you get that stuff? Okay. Or if you started the process by going online and looking at things, or third, you started the process by heading off to IKEA to just see what was out there, or someplace like that, to see what the hell was out there. The odds of your buying any given brand are fundamentally different depending on what buying activities you did. Okay? If you went to your sister, she's going to push you in a certain direction, and the rest of your buying process is going to go that way. You go to IKEA, but they're pretty good about making sure you walk out of the store with something in hand. And the same thing if you started on the internet. So fundamentally, where we get kind of a little bit dogmatic about this is, at the end of the day, the thing that matters most, given you have some kind of differentiation, however modest, given you got differentiation, what you're trying to do is shape the odds that as people go through the buying process, they'll end up someplace where they're looking at your product and saying, hey, that actually works. Okay? And that means looking at these oftentimes, most of the time, this is something else we found out empirically, looking at what we call upstream activities. Almost always the highest yield behaviors you can target are things in the research phase. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. No, I appreciate those examples. And I'm actually going to ask you, so could you put that into practice a little bit? Can you talk us through an example of how that strategy working in action and less theoretical?
Yeah. So, well, all of those were drawn from real clients, but I'll take one from Eastman's World, okay? One of our major product lines are specialty plastics, various kinds of engineering plastics. And the situation I want to talk about is something in the, we were trying to figure out, we thought our product, this particular product, was a very, very good fit for the medical device market, okay? And in particular, for being being the housing on medical devices. And you might say, why would that be a growth opportunity? Well, it turns out about 10 years ago now, the US government changed its reimbursement scheme for hospitals and doctors with regard to hospital acquired infections. Okay, you probably read about that. And basically what they said was, if somebody comes to the hospital to be treated for X, Y, or Z, or have a certain procedure, and they get an infection in the hospital, we're not going to reimburse you for the procedure you did. That gave hospitals a huge incentive to start disinfecting everything in sight, okay? And you probably noticed 5, 7, 8 years ago, everybody started using hand sanitizer long before COVID, and they were actually switched to much more heavy duty disinfectants. Interesting thing, most of the devices in a hospital are enclosed in something made out of a combination of polycarbonate and ABS, and you use harsh disinfectants, and they crack and they fail. Okay, and we had a product that doesn't crack and fail. It's actually quite chemically resistant, as they say. And but we're having a whole lot of trouble getting people to pay attention. Okay, we did a very exhaustive look at how medical device companies, people who make X-ray machines and catheters and all that kind of stuff, how do they go about designing new products, and in particular, how do they go about picking the materials that go into the housing design? And it turns out, buried in this very complicated new product development process, you'll find a housing design engineer in every one of these companies. Yes, Charlotte's got like, who'd have thunk? Turns out it's an entry-level job. It's the first job for an engineer coming in, because how can you really screw up designing the housing for something? It's not the software, it's not actually the instruments or anything like that. But the point is that was the place in the buying process where the decision was made whether or not you were going to use PCABS, the tradition material, or something else. And you dig a little bit further and you find, hey, before they actually, you wouldn't want it any other way, there's a whole set of tests. Actually, there's one critical test that the housing design engineers are supposed to do before they approve a material for their housing designs. And the crux of the whole problem, why we couldn't get penetration, and we've been out selling it and all that, and marketing it and all that kind of good stuff, was because the standard test they use was too lenient. It didn't have harsh disinfectants. It didn't have the plastics subjected to those disinfectants for long periods of times. Hospitals are now disinfecting things 8 times a day, okay, which they were not doing before. So this test was perfectly suited. PCABS passed it every single time. So our goal became, we have to get people to change the test before you can get them to even consider the material. Okay, how do you change a test that's administered by the most junior engineer on a big cross-functional product design team? And we dug into, their drivers and barriers, or what are the things that would keep them from changing the test? And it turns out, not surprisingly, that if they're going to make a change to the testing protocol, they're going to have to go in front of the whole cross-functional team, which usually includes 5 quality engineers, and explain why the new test, this other test, a harsher test, is better than the old test. Except you know, these are the most junior people around. They don't have a lot of credibility themselves. They're working on 6 different projects at the same time. So the critical thing we did was actually write a shell of a presentation that they could take to their teams to convince them that, yes, if we move to this test, we're actually doing something that's good. We're being good for the world because the world's moved to much more disinfecting. Our products are failing. We're going to get recalls. It's, you know, people aren't going to get treated, blah, blah, blah. And they could show up looking professional. Point of that whole story is buried in this long, complicated, by the way, I haven't said anything about procurement so far, okay? Zippo, because procurement's totally irrelevant. If you ask our salespeople, they come back and say, oh, procurement, yeah, they're just not interested, or the price is too high, or something like that. Had absolutely nothing to do with that. What it had to do with was how this person in the process did their job and the environment they were in. So for me, it's a classic example of what I said about how you buy shapes what you buy, okay? They're using this test. The reason they're using this test is because they don't want to be embarrassed in front of their cross-functional team. You know, they don't want to rock the boat because they don't have the seniority to rock the boat. Oh, okay. If I'm going to change their purchase, I got to change that dynamic. Is that?
That was great. It's a fascinating example. Thank you. And, you know, you kind of ended on, you know, what I wanted to ask you about, which is one of the things that you say a lot that really strikes me is out of the ordinary is how you buy determines what you buy. And you talked to it a little bit just there, but what's the science or the logic behind that? Can you go into that a little more in depth?
Yeah, and I want to confess, you know, truth in labeling here. When we started out, and when I started out, I didn't have this science. It actually caught up, not that the science caught up with me, I caught up with the science after I kind of stumbled across, hey, the buying process seems to really shape how people, what they purchase. That was an empirical observation. But the science behind it is rooted in the last 20 years of cognitive psychology and behavioral economics. And there are many, many really fascinating insights that have come out of all that work. But one of the most important, one of the most fundamental, is that the situation you're in influences what we think, what we value, and what we do. Okay? That if you, the context, I mean, they're different language, but the notion is that the context you're in literally changes what you care about, what you're looking for, you know, and therefore what you're going to decide. You know, this is the, and those of you who are familiar with Kahneman's thinking fast and slow. Basically, you know, system 1, which is the very fast, unconscious, pattern recognizing part of our brains, which is the most important in decision making, basically spends all its time kind of looking for contextual clues. And to make it, you know, really concrete, Charlotte, it's if they've zillions of experiments on this. You take someone and you put them in a room that's shabbily decorated, that chairs are cracked linoleum, paint's chipping, this, that, the other thing. And you have a discussion with them about, where you give them a test where they're picking among different brands and different kinds of things. Overwhelmingly, they tend to go for cheaper, less expensive things. If you take the exact same people and the exact same kind of people and you put them in a room that's, you know, furnished like a lawyer's office, you know, nice walls, print, you know, paintings on the wall, plush carpet, this, that, and the other thing, they actually go for luxury, that higher end of the spectrum. You put good, better, best in front of them. Point is, we're really shaped by what's going on around us. And when I try to make this concrete for people, I say something like, I use a little story, which is about shopping, you know, because everybody can kind of relate to this. think about it this way. Suppose you had decided you need some new jeans or some article of clothing like that, and you've done your research and you thought through what you wanted, and you'd figured out a brand, and you'd figured out a style and all that kind of good stuff, and you were planning on going off to the store this Saturday. And on Friday, your best friend calls, or even your second best friend calls and says, hey, you want to hang out on Saturday? And you say, well, yeah, I'd love to. I really would love that. But I've got some shopping to do. And a friend says, hey, well, I'd be happy to come along. And it's great. Saturday morning rolls around, you drive over to your friend to pick up your friend. Yeah, this is pre-COVID world, sorry. And you're in the car, your friend hops in, and friend says, hey, where are we going? What are you shopping for? And you say, oh, I'm gonna go look for some jeans. And they say, so what are you looking for? And you name whatever the brand is. And out of the corner of your eye, you're very safely concentrated on the road, but out of the corner of your eye, you see a little twitch. You just see a little twitch on your friend's face. They kind of tick their head a little bit. Question for you all. What happened to the odds that you'll end up buying the jeans you set out to buy? Okay. They just dropped dramatically. They may not have gone to zero, but all of a sudden you're kind of, what's running through your head is, oh, they don't think very much of my purchase. Do I want to go ahead and I really want it that much, so I want to go ahead, or actually do I want to have a good time with my friend? And more often than not, people will say, hey, we don't actually have to do that. Why don't we just go shopping, or why don't we just go to the park or go do something else? And they'll come back, they might come back and buy it later. Oftentimes they don't. And so what's going on in that circumstance, just who you're with changes what you want. I don't want that brand as much as I did before. Why? Because I actually care more about my friend. Now I can give a really, concrete example of that if, Charlotte, you want me to, about from the consumer world. All right, this was, again, early on in our journey on this, and we've been asked by, this is long enough ago that I can use the company name. This is working for Coca-Cola. They'd asked us, they posed the following problem. Said, hey, in Germany, we have a lot of young adults, kind of 18 to 30, who buy and drink a lot of Coke outside work. So our per capita consumption is quite high outside of work, but it's quite low at work. And we thought that should be, again, we don't really understand it. We thought that was kind of there's no reason. They love the product, so why wouldn't they do it work? So we thought it was a supply problem. So, we spent a couple of years, putting in more vending machines and convincing company cafeterias to stock Coke and so forth. And needle didn't move. Moved a little bit, but it really didn't move, and certainly not enough to justify this. So could you help us kind of figure out what the hell's going on? So, which we did. When we went through this, we ended up doing a behavior-based segmentation, and it led us to trying to understand the situation that the people were in at work. And so I'm going to describe one of those situations. So there are many, quote, situations. It could be, you're having lunch at work, you're in a meeting at work, there are different kinds of meetings at work, you're working at your desk by yourself. All of those actually turn out, those different situations affect what you will drink hugely. So I'm going to describe one particular example because it was not only so amusing, but so powerful for the Coca-Cola team at the time. Think about, this is young adults again, and this is a large meeting with outsiders at work. Okay, large meeting outside of work. So you ask people, you ask these folks, these young adults, describe the physical and social environment you're in. Well, I'm in this meeting, I'm the low person on the totem pole, I'm supposed to be seen and not heard. It's boring as hell because I don't have anything to do. I'm supposed to just take notes. and it goes on forever. Okay, this is Germany. This is 15, 18 years ago, something like that. This goes on forever, and I don't really have anything to do. So you say, well, what is it you want out of that meeting? Not what do you want out of the product, but what do you want out of the meeting? And the answer came back overwhelming. Two things primarily. I want to stay awake, and I want to look like I belong. Okay. It's like, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. You know, that if I'm that person in that situation, what is it that I'm trying to do? I'm trying to stay awake, and I'm trying to make sure I fit in. I don't look like, you know, the low person on the totem pole. And then we ask people, so tell us a little bit about how you think about, you know, coffee and tea and all the various beverages that you might have in a meeting. And one person said something which just summarized what the rest of the research was tending toward, and it just explained everything dropped into place. And this person said, well, you know, coffee is a suit, Coke is jeans. And right then and there, we said, oh, I know exactly what's going on here. You could put a pile of Coke 10 feet high in the back of this room, and they wouldn't touch it, because it would make them look like they didn't belong. It would make them look like a kid. As it turned out, we actually dug into this a little bit further. You know, certainly at that time, I don't know whether it's still true now, but one of the rites of passage, you know, in a German family is when you become an adult, you get to drink coffee. And when you're a kid, you drink kid drinks. And so they just wouldn't have touched it. So this is the point, Charlotte, of the context. You know, the same people would walk out of that room. They walk out of that room and be in a different meeting with different people. And you know, people often say, "So what did you advise Coke to do?" We said, target different situations, different occasions. The small creative meeting, perfect place for Coke. Don't try to push it on people and what was really funny about this, just as a personal thing, is this is back when I was a consultant and I was delivering this set of insights to the global brand Coke team. And there was a German woman on the team. She was one of the brand managers. And about halfway through, she starts to crack up and stopped and said, "What, why are you laughing? It's not supposed to be the place where you're supposed to laugh." And she said, "You hit the nail on the head. I'm the only person on the Coke team who doesn't drink Coke at work. And you just explained why. I drink coffee." Okay, when you looked, and there she was, she had her coffee cup, and everybody else had a Coke. So anyway, point is,
that's a great story.
Yeah, it's a fun story, regardless.
No, thank you so much for that. And you know, I had another question for you, but we have a bunch coming in from the audience, so I'm going to cut me short then. So no surprise, a lot of people have some COVID, post-COVID questions. So I'm going to kind of combine a couple of them. So one is talking about how the post-COVID world impacts a B2B buying process, and then a little bit more broadly, as COVID changed, behavior of the consumer, and how can we address this issue regarding growth?
The second question, sorry. I mean, the first one was, how has COVID affected the B2B buying process?
Yes, B2B buying process, yeah. You want to hit that first, and then?
Well, no, give me both questions if
Sure.
you could.
And then COVID changed the behavior of the consumer. How do you address this issue regarding growth?
Okay. So, how did COVID affect any of these buying processes? Well, I'll go back to the first principle. What it did was change the situation and the environment in which people were doing the buying. They're doing it from home. They're doing it curbside. All of the behaviors that people typically, retailers and everybody else, rely on. What's the first thing people do when they go shopping for clothes? They start feeling things. Okay, so how did COVID affect buying processes? greatly disrupted the whole process of sampling and testing, whether it's B2B or it's been a big issue for us. Is, you know, we depend a lot on sending samples of our materials to customers so they can try them out, see how they run on their machines, see how they fit in their products, and so on and so forth. Well, nobody's in the labs, you know. That very simple kind of thing. They can't do the sampling. But it is broader than that. I mean, it forced people more to the internet as sources of information, which is not a surprise. But if you go back to my furniture example, that actually has a big impact. Some products are better sold experientially, and others are just fine seeing it on a screen. So you saw differential effects on categories. Part of the big drop in textiles, and I know I'm not doing B2B directly, I'm kind of mixing your two questions, I apologize for that. But the textiles, the apparel industry dropped, whatever, it's 30-40%, sales dropped 30-40% at the height of COVID. And mostly that was attributed to, everybody's taking the freedom to, wear sweatpants and, whatever they want, their pajamas. Actually, a good bit of it was couldn't feel the product. It's a critical part of the buying process, or it was expensive. You gotta, it's gotta get shipped to you, you gotta try it, then you gotta ship it back. That's expensive, takes time, so on and so forth. Made a lot of things just more complicated and harder to do.
Thank you for that. Another audience question, non-COVID related, is a little bit more about your how. So what kind of research do you do to figure out these high yield behaviors? Interviews, ethnography, any specific advice?
Yes, so it's a combination actually. It always starts and has to have very thorough qualitative research to understand what are the steps in the buying process. It's quite literally, we call up B2B, B2C. I mean, the real difference between B2B and B2C is B2C buying processes tend to be somewhat shorter and simpler, fewer steps, not always. Sometimes they're very convoluted, financial products, insurance, things like that can be very convoluted. Most B2B, many steps and that kind of stuff. And so the qualitative research is getting a very accurate understanding of what people actually do, what activities they're actually doing. And the question that I often get on this is, well, can't you just ask your salespeople? And the answer is I always interview the salespeople last, because they actually don't know what's going on, what I call upstream of procurement, okay? Purpose of procurement, one of the big purposes of a procurement department is to keep your salespeople from actually talking to anybody in your company, and they're pretty good at it these days. So most of your salespeople don't know what's going on, but the qualitative research is quite literally, please tell me from the moment you had an idea in your head, what did you do then? What did you do then? What did you do then? Oh, I looked on the internet. Oh, I talked to a friend. Oh, I read this report. Great. This can be it takes a while, but what you end up doing is mapping out all the potential activities that people do. And then you go back and you do a piece of quantitative research to find out literally what are the paths people take through the process. Because what you're actually looking for, we didn't get into this anyway, is there's a path dependency. That was the point of my furniture story. If I start in IKEA, my subsequent actions are different than if I start on the internet. That's why I end up buying a different brand. And what you try to do is quantify literally how many people did the first activity, how many people did the second activity, how many people did the third, how many did the fourth. And among other things, you start to find out, where do people drop out of the buying process? Because that's actually the biggest source of growth for most people, for most of the companies I've worked with, is actually keeping people in the buying process and not having them drop out. I mean, if you actually do get the book and take a look at it, there's one of the Caesar Financial one, which is about finding a financial advisor and investing money. The dropout rate in the very first steps of the buying process, like first meeting, first contact with a financial advisor, it's like 85%. Okay, so you improve your follow-up rate from 85 to 80, a relatively small percentage change, you get a huge impact downstream. So qualitative, quantitative. Once you've done your segmentation, you're back to the qualitative to kind of find out why it is people do what they do. And you were asking a little bit about the techniques. A lot of that is straightforward, good qualitative, but we do a lot of ethnographic type work as well. My point about I keep an eye on the time. Great story about how people buy beer, or how they buy soda in South Africa. They buy, Coke. We actually stood in the stores and the little convenience stores and watch people. And basically, what people do is they come in and they touch all the bottles and they buy the one that's the coldest. Doesn't matter what the brand is. They buy the one that's the coldest. Okay. So, a combination of classic ask people what they did and go watch them.
Thank you. And I like your holding the beer story maybe for the book readers.
Yeah.
So we are quickly running out of time. So I'm just going to ask you one last bit that had come through. How are you seeing this being used? Do you use it in the C-suite? Is it for senior staff? Where do you teach this approach in the firm? Everywhere. Just speak from my Eastman experience. I had the good luck that our CEO is actually somebody who was at Monitor when we were hammering all this out, so he was already converted. But no, we've taken all of the executive VPs, all the division presidents, all the GMs through it. It's a big change in mindset. I mean, that when I said in the beginning, it's the conventional wisdom says do this, and we're saying do something quite different, or in addition to. And it's aimed at, though, if you really ask that, this is aimed at the person who's got responsibility for making something grow. Okay, whoever it is that's got a goal, at the beginning of the year that says, we've been growing in the market rate for the last 3 years. 2 years from now, I want to be growing 2 times that. Okay, whoever's got that kind of a goal and has tried all the usual stuff or seen their colleagues try the usual stuff and it doesn't work, that's who should be paying attention. Oh, fantastic. And I think that's a great ending point for us. I want to thank you so much. This has been a very engaging webinar. I think as we're kind of making our way out of the pandemic and people have been webinared out, I think that this has been extremely engaging, and you've done such a fantastic job of relaying your experience and talking to some great cases that are in the book. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at another webinar.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.